Lee again. Hi everybody, it's Lee again, doing my crazy Facebook live thing once a month. So this month we're talking about pelvic floor. We all have one. We do, and we we have there's many relationships and things about the pelvic floor. Let's start talking. I have a little picture over here of the pelvic floor that I might show you. Actually I want to tell you it's not a little picture, it's a freaking big picture. Look at that pelvic floor. You know what? That one's better. Whoop. Let me go the correct way. Look at that pelvic floor. Now that's a woman's pelvic floor. And here you can see, whoopsie, I'm going to look through it. So you can see that here is the bony structure. And obviously we have the muscular structure. You know what's kind of amazing in all of these different pictures and all of these different diagrams of the pelvic floor is they don't much show all of the fascia, because the pelvic floor is a bowl. So I'm going to show you the bowl. And this is Joey. Hi, Joey. Now I want you to notice that the pelvic floor, the pelvis, is a bowl, as you can see, right? Now, I don't know, I think we might have talked about a tailbone fall, maybe, maybe not, but we'll touch on it just a hair here today in our pelvic floor bowl sort of situation. So one of the things that I'm alluding to here is that there are so many layers of fascia in the pelvic bowl. I mean, there are layers and layers and layers of fascia in the pelvis. So you have to realize, or I'm going to help you to realize, is that all the muscles that you're seeing pictures of, that I'm showing you pictures of, these muscles are actually inside different fascial layers in the pelvic floor. The other thing that's going on is not only are your muscles in this fascia, but so are your organs. So are your organs. So you have all these things that are kind of like in all these different layers of fascia. Okay, so there's lots of fascia, but it rarely shows up in any of the anatomy pictures. Or if it does show up, it doesn't show up to give you the breadth and the interrelationships that the fascia is having. Because the fascia that's inside your pelvic bowl is actually also coming from the posterior abdominal wall, goes around and becomes part of the pelvic floor fascia. I mean, it's much, much, much more it's not, I don't know if I want to say complicated, but it's much more comprehensive and interrelated. I posted something the other day that I hope you're reading, is that I posted how fascia is so miraculous and that it's so everywhere. And it's fascia that allows you to sing that song, the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone. But actually I wrote the knee bone's connected to the nose bone. And that's because fascia is so connected through the whole thing. So let me show you, staying on the fascia idea, let me show you a picture here of something. I apologize for coming out of your picture, because I have so many pictures over here. Okay, so look at this picture here. This picture is the core fascia in the core. Okay, look, it even says core. Hey, thanks for core. And what this fascia does is, this fascia in the core comes down inside your hip bones, right? And becomes, it is part of a continuation of the pelvic floor. So if you notice here, it actually comes down all the way from the respiratory diaphragm, and look at how it's starting in the neck. It's going through the thorax. It becomes your core fascia, which goes down and into the adductors, which are the muscles between the legs. But this is the fascia. And this part it merges into the pelvic floor. So this idea that fascia is so continuous is something that it's important to put in your head, especially if you're a body worker. If you're not a body work person, it's nice to think that when my neck is hurting, it might be because some other fascia has something involved. Maybe I have a bladder infection that's pulling on this fascia that goes all the way up to my neck. But I might not think that I might not think that, but if I start to remember that fascia is so interconnected like this, that I would go, I've got something else going on somewhere else, and it could give me a pain pattern in my TMJ. So really important to think that. So let's talk a little bit more. Pardon me for like getting out of here. I'm going to try to stay in the picture here. So we have this pelvis, right? So what is your pelvis? Well, some people might say it holds my first chakra, right? The chakras. It holds the first chakra, the red chakra that's glowing red, that is home, home and family. So my pelvis has home and family, right? The sacrum, the bone at the back of the pelvis, that bone that is the back side of my pelvis is actually called the sacred bone. So now we have this place that's actually home and family, and it encompasses the sacred bone, right? The bone of the soul, and that's our pelvis. So one of the deals with the pelvis is that this is an interesting concept to not only explain, but for you guys to really understand, is that we are seated into our pelvis, although we are not collapsed into our pelvis. If you could see my body, you'd know was collapsing into my pelvis. Is that we are seated in our pelvis, but we are not collapsed in our pelvis. Have you ever seen anybody like walking around and they look like they're super kind of narrow in their pelvis, and then they have some kind of a, pardon me for saying this, muffin top on top, or their gut is sitting above, and that's because the pelvis is so tight that they are not seated inside that pelvis. Okay, so what's happening is that they're so tight that all of the extra is being pushed above. So that's what you're seeing when you see that, is you're seeing such a tight pelvis and pelvic floor that they don't fit inside themselves. But this is the concept that I said was going to sound a little crazy, is the one that says, when I'm seated in my pelvis, I have the ability to stand tall. When I'm not seated correctly in my pelvis, I don't have the ability to stand tall. So when I was a Rolfing student, when I was a student once upon a time ago, Rolfing fascia, which was a big fascial thing out in Boulder, Colorado, at the Institute, is one of the things I learned there was in Rolfing, you have to have an up to have a down, and you have to have a down to have an up. So I have to have a pretty good seated pelvis in order for me to have that ability to really have my body be up as well. So I have to have good pelvis relationships and have everything in my pelvis sort of working well enough, because who's perfect? Not me, I'm telling you, is that in order to have an up. So this is true in anything, because if I'm only somebody who's in the physical and I don't have the emotional and the spiritual piece, then I'm missing parts and I'm not as complete. And it's the same on a physical level, is I have to have down to have an up. Okay, so I really have to have a good seating in my pelvis. But let's start exploring the pelvis just a little bit, so that with some pictures, of course, that I'm going to mess up, but what the heck, because I'll try. But let's explore what it looks like in the different pelvises. How about that? So let's do a woman first, okay? So I used these at the Holistic Women's event. That's why they're so darn big, and they're showing us. So this is the side view of a woman. Okay, so we're going to look at a man as well after this, but this is a side view. So one of the things that you're seeing is that, let me get myself oriented. This is the front of the woman, and obviously this is the back. So here's the sacrum, which is that sacred bone, right? Here's the sacrum. And what we have in front of the sacrum is the bowel. We have the bowel coming down, and obviously the bowel runs out here to the rectum and to right here. There's the exit. right here, in front of the bowel, we have the uterus right here with its nice curve towards the front of the body. We have a uterine curve that way. And then in front of the uterus, we have the bladder, and this is the bladder cut away. Look how thick the muscle of the bladder is. When I did a dissection many years ago, not me personally, but I was at part of a group of 8 of us that did a dissection, and we got to cut into the bladder. Well, obviously we went in everything, but cutting into the bladder is like a Super Bowl a super ball, and the walls of the Super Bowl are super thick, because what it's going to do is it's going to let it expand and expand and expand and get thinner, right? So isn't that interesting that in my picture here, it is showing you how thick the walls of the bladder are that are actually going to be expanding. So here we have this lovely sort of look fitting into my pelvis. And like I said, every single one of these is encased in fascia. So there's fascia around them, and there's fascia in between them. Fascia, fascia, fascia. Oh my God. I have to say, I started out as a muscle person many years ago, and then over these last many years, I have come to respect fascia more and more and more. I think it is the most amazing thing. Maybe I need to do my next one on fascia, because it is stunning to what has come to me over the years. Okay, so I digressed. There we go. So here we have all of this in the pelvic floor for a woman, okay? And one of the things that happens is that we often have incontinence in the bladder, we have leaking, we have incontinence, we have the uterus that sometimes feels like that starts to prolapse. So let's look at a little bit closer here. I'm going to show another picture. This one, actually, I'm going to show you this one, okay? So here is another picture of that, which shows a little bit better, actually, the bowel. There's a little bit clearer picture of the bowel back here, the uterus and the bladder. You can see that it's cut at a different level here. So we'll get the urethra here, we'll get the vagina here, and we'll get the rectum here. So we know that in our pelvis and within this pelvic floor are all of these openings, which I also had showed you in this picture here. This picture shows you how we have the urethra, the vagina, the urethra, let me come so you can see it. The urethra, the vagina, and then the rectum, all within that pelvic floor. So think about this. I'm going to back up a little and center this. Think about this, that if I have this hip is in the wrong position, what do you think is going to happen? Can you not imagine? So if I have, let me get in the middle, I apologize, and step back a little. So if I have one hip that's out of position in some way, what do you think happens to all of that in my pelvic floor? What happens? What happens is that there's torquings and there's twistings on all of those things. So isn't it going to be more difficult for a woman to have a baby, or for a woman, for incontinence can happen because I've got torquings in there. I can have really a challenging time having the baby. And so one of the things I wanted to show you was, you remember the position of the uterus. Remember the position of the uterus, that it's tipped. Remember, it's tipped towards the nose side, right? So what can happen when a woman has some kind of a fall or something that actually jars her, whether it's a tailbone fall, sometimes it could be a car accident, is that the uterus is the possibility, okay? So look at here how it says normal. We've got normal right there in that nice tan. And here's the front of the body, and they're just showing you the bladder right there. What can happen here is that the uterus starts to tip and go into different positions, right? Which totally changes my pelvic floor. When the tipping and that happens, because it's also embedded in the fascia, so I'm also going to get these fascial changes that are happening within the floor of the pelvis. If that has happened, and I also want to tell you that it's super common for the uterus to change position when somebody's a horseback rider. Or the big things that really change the uterine position is any kind of a fall that jars the body, horseback riding, which is that constant doing this, right? Car accidents, something big enough that can do that, falls, and you can fall on your back and have it flip backwards. These tailbone falls are just notorious for actually changing the position of the uterus, and all of this changes the nature of the pelvic floor. All of this changes the pelvic floor. The whole pelvic floor then becomes something that has twistings and tensions and all of that on it, okay? So now I'd like to show you the pelvic floor of a man. You know, the pelvic floor of a woman is like a big empty cavern, you know, like a big empty cavern, where the pelvic floor of a man, when I hold the sacrum and I hold him on front, feels like a tight, really contained little package. What can I say? This is the pelvic floor of a man. And this is interesting because what it shows, and I find this super interesting. Okay, so we've got, oh, see, I'm in front now. We've got the sacrum here for the man. Here's his bowel. Once again, we have his bowel. And this is super interesting. Here's the bladder, but there's the prostate underneath the bladder. Can you guys see that? So we have bladder and we have prostate. That prostate's about the size of a walnut. Don't forget that all of these are embedded in the fascial layers. So it's making it look like that they're all next to each other, but they're just sitting next to each other, when in reality is that there's fascia around all of them. Fascia, fascia, fascia. So what happens here is that, and trust me, if a man falls, he's got the same kind of deal. He doesn't have a uterus that flips, but what does happen is that there's even more tension, greater tensions in the pelvic floor. And I'm going to kind of blow you away just a hair in just a few minutes. Okay, so what happens is that the urethra actually goes, the prostate wraps around the urethra. It's one of the reasons why, I'm flipping, I apologize for putting the picture in and out, is one of the reasons why men need to drink more water, and especially as they get older, and they don't tend to do that, is because they need the water, they need the fluids to go through the bladder, through the urethra that goes through the prostate. So it needs to go through the prostate to sort of keep everything kind of moving and healthy. That is one of the big deals going on there. So don't forget that we have this prostate sitting underneath. Now, what do I want to say about this? I want to say, huh? No, I want to say this. Okay. Fascia. This is the super interesting part also to me. All that fascia that's around your uterus, that's around the prostate, that's around the bladder, actually is continuous and connected to the fascia that goes in and goes down your leg. So when you see somebody who is knock-kneed, right, or you see somebody who is pigeon-toed, they have got a tremendous amount of tension going on in these in this pelvic bowl. They have all this tension. They have tensions that are going down through the pelvic bowl and down through and into the legs, down in the insides of the legs from the pelvic bowl and the pelvic floor. So you have to recognize that the legs, the internal rotation of the legs is only happening because there is tensions going on somewhere in the pelvic bowl or somewhere in the lower abdomen or the pelvic bowl. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story. This kid must be, it must be, okay, today it's 2020 and I've been in this house 9 years. I've been in the house 9.5 years and it was probably 5. So maybe this is 15 years ago. So the kid is probably 28 and he doesn't live here anymore. And he's probably never going to see this. So I can tell the story. So no names involved. Okay. So I had this young man come in to see me. And he was walking with his legs, I mean, he could not walk with his legs together. His legs were, he was waddling in to see me doing this because he couldn't put his legs together because his testicles had so much pain. He had so much pain in his testicles for over a year that this kid did not go to school, right? He couldn't go to school. He could hardly sit in a car. He just kind of had to lay in his bed and have his legs open. Okay, so he was, how old was he? He was 16 or 17, 16. He was 16. Okay, does it matter? Okay, whatever he is, he's 15 or 16 years older now. Anyway, so he's probably 30. So he comes in and this is happening. And in my mind, this is well, I graduated from osteopathic school 12 years ago and I was in school for 5 years. Okay, so this was right at either at the beginning of when I was going to osteopathic school or right before. Okay, so I don't know that. I mean, I knew a lot, but I didn't know like a lot back then. So anyway, he came in and I was like, in my head, I'm like, oh, if I could swear on Facebook, I would. I was like, what do I do? I was like freaking out. Okay, but I looked like this. I just went, that's interesting. So anyway, so I did, where's my picture? I worked these muscles in here. I worked the muscles in there. I worked all of that. I worked his low back. I worked his abdomen muscles. I mean, I worked all these things and I was like, hmm. And, and he came to see me and it wasn't that he got better, but he got better enough. Like he still couldn't put his legs together, but he wasn't having like a lot of other pains and aches and stuff like this. Well, anyway, so to make the long story shorter is what I realized is that, here's what I realized, is that his pelvic floor was getting compromised, but I didn't like realize that what I did was got a wild intuitive hair that I should take, and I didn't know how to do it at the time. I made it up. Is that your small intestines are right in here, okay? Your small intestines are right around your belly button. And what dawned on me is that I should lift up his small intestines. So I told him that. I said, I don't know, we're going to try this. And so when I lifted his small intestines, the pain left his testicles. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that fascia is totally interconnected. And the fascia, I wish I had a picture of the small intestines. I never know what I need a picture of. I never know what I'm going to tell you. So the small intestines are here, and the fascia around the mesentery, which is the bag that the small intestines are in, has fascia around it that goes down, goes through the groin, and goes down in the inner leg. But it also, as soon as I sort of took a hold, as soon as I can't find where I am, as soon as I took a hold of the fascia, like I was in his fascia, what happened is that bang, he felt it right in his testicles. So I slowly but surely released his small intestines. So what do I think happened? I think that he got very, very inflamed in his small intestines, and that it went right down, the small intestines and right into his testicles and right into the muscle, to the fascia that's in between his legs. That is what I found had happened. But did it start with his testicles? No. Did it start even with his pelvic floor? No. What it started with was his small intestines, and then it went down there. It went down there. So that pelvic floor has so much more interconnection between places that so your legs are hooked up and into my pelvic floor. My organs and my fascia of my back are going into, merging into my pelvic floor. So the interconnectedness is quite amazing, quite amazing. And so I feel like to only think of like one part is to shortchange yourself in the ability to try to help somebody on a bigger scale. The other thing is that if you're educated enough or you have an open mind enough and you know anatomy, because at that time I hadn't gone to osteopathic school really, but what I did have was a good knowledge of anatomy at that time, so I could go to the small intestines and I could work these individual places to try to bring all this together for this young man. Well, he left me that day and I never saw him again. I did hear that the family moved to the Pacific Northwest. I hope they're doing well. I hope he's doing well. I heard through somebody else that he was driving and going back to school. And so, but you never know. I mean, you never know. So don't forget that the pelvic floor is such a good, it's that place of home. It's that place where a big part of us lives. And it's important to help somebody have a balanced pelvic floor so that they feel like they can move well and sit well and just have ease in there. I thank anybody who has actually joined me. I hope that there were no questions, so I hope I touched on all the things that you wanted to hear. And if you should ever want me to cover a topic, then I'd be happy to do that. Obviously, fascia is going to be the next one, and I look forward to talking to all of you. Thanks. Bye.